Opportunity. We're in this Nail It Down series, working through some of those fundamental, core, basic questions that we need to nail down at some point in our faith journeys if we're actually going to be able to build on it and take the next step. Until we nail some of these down, we're never really going to be able to take that next part and a place in our faith journey. Now, nailing some of these things down, they're going to build on each other. That's why I began with the idea of, is there a final authority, and is He the final authority in my life? Because once we do that, then we found our why. Then moving forward, everything is going to filter under that. So if this is His actual word, and He's the final authority in our lives, then He gets to determine why it is we're actually here. And we looked at that last week. We were created, according to the creation account in Genesis chapter 1, we're created to relate, to reflect, and to rule. To relate to Him, to reflect Him, and to rule for Him. Not with Him, He doesn't need help, but to rule for Him. And maybe last week you left and said, well, that's okay, I get my why, I understand why I'm here, but how does that actually work its way out? And again, the why is always more important and always greater than the how and the what. If we don't have that, then we're just doing things hoping that it works, hoping that these things matter. But once we have our why, then we can move forward. So if we've been created to relate, to reflect, and to ultimately rule for Him, then how are we going to work some of those things out? So I want to walk through those three ideas, those three elements once again, and add a little bit of a how to each one of those. And each one of these could be weeks long of a dialogue, but I don't think you want that from me. But I want us to at least touch on each of those, beginning with the idea of relating. I mean, how do we walk out that purpose in our lives? We've been created to relate to God. We're made in His image. Part of that inherently is that we're now able to connect with Him, relate to Him in a way that the rest of creation cannot. How do we begin to walk that part of our faith journey out, walk that part of our created existence out in our lives? Well, most of us get the core idea of what it is to relate and to have a relationship. It is when two people come together, willing to allow themselves to be known and a desire to know the other person. A relationship is not saying, I know you. A relationship is, I am willing to allow you to know me. And those are two different things. I can know a lot of people but not be in relationship with any of them if I have not allowed them to know me and if they have not allowed me to know them. So a true relationship is when people come together and I say, I'm going to let you know more about me and you are going to have to do the same. That's not natural for me. Maybe for some of you it might be, but for me and maybe for many of you, that's not a natural thing. I am typically guarded. I have always been that way. I don't allow people to get too close. Perhaps it's a protective measure, a little defense mechanism. I don't know. But I don't allow too many people in. But then once I do let someone in, I just kind of open everything up. It's an all or nothing. That is typically how I live my life, all or nothing. And so I have a very small group of people that I have allowed to know me, but they know every bit of me. Then everyone else I typically hold at a distance. And perhaps you operate in the same way, maybe not. But when it comes to our relationship with God, that idea of how to have a relationship is the same. It's us willing to pursue with diligence, with intention, our relationship with God for the purpose of knowing Him just as He knows us. But He made the first move. He's already revealed Himself, as we looked at a few weeks ago, in His Word. So He said, this is what I'm about. This is what I'm like. And when you connect with me, when you interact with me, when you converse with me, you can do that based on what you know about my character, and I've already revealed that to you. So the idea is that you and I need to find a way to approach God and say, I am in on this. You took the initiative. You invited me into a relationship with you, and I am willing to step into that, and now I want to know you as you know me. Well, that pursuit often needs a plan. And for me, and I've shared this with you before, My plan has been for years and years that before I hear the voice of anyone else in my home, before I hear the voice of anyone else on television, before I read the words of anyone else on social media and see anybody else, I first am going to hear the voice of God. That's going to be the way I begin. And by God's grace, I've been able for the last 7 or 8 years to do that every single morning. And it has cut out so much distraction in my life. Because by the time I hear anyone else, by the time I read anyone else, by the time I hear another voice, another song, before I see a complete image, I have already heard from God that day. And that has made such a difference. And for me, the constant reminder is Psalm 143:8. Let the morning bring me word of your unfailing love, for I have put my trust in you. Show me the way I should go, for to you I entrust my life. 2 times, I trust you. I've entrusted my life to you. Let the morning be where it all begins. I want to hear your word. I want you to show me what steps I should take throughout the day. And as you've heard me say it before, I think that matters. I think the place matters. I think you need to carve out a sacred space and make it your own, where every morning this is a place where you go. And I would pick a place in your house or in your room or wherever you are that is not used for really anything else. In other words, your bed is not really the right place, because oftentimes you're just going to doze off in the middle of it. And there's nothing that makes you feel worse about your walk with God than to fall asleep on Him over and over again. So don't even start there. I think posture matters. I think how you are when you're in His presence. Maybe you're not able to take a knee, but maybe that's the case, but propping your feet up and just sipping on your favorite drink and just kind of like you're on the beach with Jesus. I'm not quite sure that's the best way to start, but I'm not going to tell you how to do it. I'm just telling you that it's going to take a plan, and it's going to have to be purposeful. It's going to have to be intentional along the way. A relationship like that doesn't just happen. It has to be worked at. You say, well, that's effort? Come on. God doesn't want me to have to work that hard. Surely He knows. I want to ask you a question here as it pertains to that. What evidence have you given God that you actually want a relationship with Him? If you had to give God some bit of evidence to say, look, I'm doing this, you ought to know it. You ought to be able to see that. What evidence have you actually given Him that building this, developing this relationship with Him is really, really important to you? And perhaps even supposedly the most important thing in your life. This is a special weekend for me personally, in that it is the anniversary of my first date with Christy, who is my wife now. So this is a big deal for me. The interesting thing about that is this was not her first date with me. This was my first date with her, as I've been told. The anniversary of the real first date, according to her, is next month, around Valentine's Day weekend. And this has been a part of our story forever. And looking back on that now, I still don't really understand what was going on. But at this weekend, years and years and years ago, as a sophomore in college, I asked her to go to a concert with me. We went to the concert. We had a good time. We came back. I dropped her off. I said, I'll call you. She said, that'll be great. I continued to call, and we continued to talk, and we continued to go out places and go grab stuff to eat and just meet up on campus at our college. That was the beginning. But along those moments, I started to get the feeling that she didn't quite grasp what was really going on with us. And she is not in any way lacking intelligence. She is an incredibly intelligent girl. She's an incredibly intelligent woman. She's relationally intelligent. I'm not even taking a jab at that. But I could tell something is not really clicking with her. And I partly knew because some of my friends who every now and then would, go out to eat with and just grab someone or invite someone, I could tell that she was in that rotation of some of my buddies. I'd see them come back from wherever, from a restaurant. I'm like, that feels weird. So, okay, I feel like there's something, but I could tell there wasn't. So about 4 weeks later, around that Valentine's Day weekend, our fraternity had a party thing, and it wasn't on Valentine's Day. I think it was the day before or after. But I invited her. It's kind of because I was dating her. She wasn't dating me, but I was dating her. And I invited her, and we went out. And then after that night was over, I walked her to her dorm room, and I was about to say goodnight. Then I said, "Can I talk to you for a second?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "I don't feel like we're tracking in the same way." And she, in her own words, I don't really remember the exact words, but said, "Oh, explain." I said, "I am done with everyone else. Like I don't want to go out with anybody else. I want to be with you." And it was almost like, "Oh, really? Like how could it have been any more obvious than this?" And she walked away and just said, "Okay," and then went to her room. And I thought, are we dating? Or I couldn't quite figure out what was going on. And a few hours later, I had a friend, actually another fraternity brother, and he knocked on the door, and I opened up, and he said, "Hey," and he just said, "You win." I said, "What?" And he said, "Yeah, Christy just called and canceled our upcoming date and said y'all were going to make a run of it." And I was like, "Oh, I hate that for you." So he left, and I was like, finally, what was... But all along, I thought I was giving some really clear indicators that I really like you a lot. But she wasn't receiving it in the same way. It wasn't that clear to her. And I think at times, we, in our own way, feel like we're doing all the things that we should do to show God, like, no, I'm a Christian man. I'm serious about this. And it's not traveling in the same way. God's not seeing that. Because God's looking down and seeing people that get around to saying hello about 5 hours after they've been up. Or find, every other week, find the energy to post a verse or ask for help. And although all of those things are sincere, and I'm not willing to say that God doesn't want to hear or is not paying attention to any of those, but I don't know that those would qualify as evidence when it comes to trying to let God know, like, I am serious about building this. And maybe we just need to step back and say, what evidence am I really giving God that I desire a true relationship with Him? Because maybe until then, He's watching and He's seeing us be a part of all of these other things, and it just doesn't really make sense to Him. Again, I'm not trying to say that I understand the way God sees it and God feels the way I might feel, but I do think there's a sense in which we could step back and begin to question, like, how much am I really putting into this? How much effort, how much time, how much intention am I really putting in to developing that relationship with Him? Well, there's the idea of reflection as well. It's not just relationship, it's the reflection part. So how do we reflect? God desires not only the relationship with us, but God desires to see Himself in us. He desires to see His character and His nature in our lives. He can look at all of creation that He made, and He can see glimpses of His glory, but He wants to be able to look at us and see us as a mirror where He can look and see His character. And He cannot look and see His patience in my life until He sees me waiting, but still full of hope. He cannot look down and see His mercy in my life unless He sees me covering an offense that hurt deeply. So it's not about an aesthetic of I look religious or I look kind or I look godly. It's an action. It's about Him seeing me put into action the things that He's revealed to me. So if relating is ultimately about pursuing Him and knowing Him, reflecting is about trusting and obeying Him. It's not about doing religious things. It's about me making decisions right now that reflect the character that He hopefully sees when He looks into my life. In Romans chapter 12, verse 1, it says, "I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." It's about trusting him enough to say, you've said this. You're the final authority in my life. Your words revealed this to me. I'm created in part to be a mirror for you, and so I'm going to do as you would have me do. Now, mirrors are helpful. They're also very discouraging at times when you don't see what you want to see in your life. I know many of you have good days and you like your mirror. Sometimes I see your post. You'll feel cute, especially you ladies, and you'll, in your car, take a picture. I've never understood the car selfie, but you take a picture, and you post it, and you say something like, feeling cute today, or something like, oh, all right, good for you. I don't know what to do with that, but that's good. It's better than a picture of food, good grief. But, it's still, I don't understand it, but you put it there. But then if you take that picture and you drive into Walmart and you go inside and you purchase whatever you purchase, and then you're in the self-check line and you look up at the security monitor, the gig is up. Like that is how you look, and we all know that. So all of a sudden, I don't want to see that anymore. Now, I like the other. This mirror made me look good. The lighting was right. I took a picture. I posted it, moved it on. But then the idea that that's actually me, that's a tough one. And I feel the same way. Every now and then I'll see a picture someone else has taken. I'm thinking, oh, good grief, that looks terrible. Like, who is that? And I'll do the same in the checkout. I'll look up and go, wow, Paul came to visit. He's shopping with me. I see him right in the security guard. And if I ever get pulled aside for accidentally shoplifting a stick of gum or something, they go, I can see it on the camera. I'll say, well, who's that? That's my granddad. Like, he hasn't been around. We sometimes don't enjoy what we see in the mirror because it doesn't reflect what we really had hoped was reality. And at times, I believe our lives are not the mirror of God's character. And in those moments, I sometimes wonder if God treats it like that mirror that I see when I'm standing in checkout. Where I go, oh, good grief. Let's look away and move on. Because 2 Chronicles 16:9 says, the eyes of the Lord range throughout the earth to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to him. So his eyes range the earth, watching our lives, and every now and then he sees something that makes him stop and stare. And it says those are the ones that he entrusts his strength to. So what in the world am I doing right now that would cause God to stop and stare? To say, yeah, I can see me in him. That's worthy of stopping. Because most of the time, if the mirror is not giving us the reflection we want, we just keep going. And as I read this verse and think through God's Spirit passing through my life and in my community, my city, am I doing anything that would make the Spirit of God stop and go, wow, that's a God guy right there. That's somebody who's putting everything he has into fulfilling the purpose for which I created him. Because those are the moments ultimately that are going to result in having God's strength, he says. So reflecting is about us being willing to trust and obey and have God see a picture of himself, even if it be just a little bit, when he takes a look at our lives. Well, there's one more idea, the idea of ruling. How do we rule? I'm sure there's a lot there, more than can be covered in 5 minutes, but we rule ultimately by helping creation, all of creation, fulfill what it was created to be. Helping everyone become the person God created them to become. That is what it is to rule. It is not just to pass a law, pass an order, dictate, order around. That's not ruling. Ruling is to say, God, you have given me this, and I am going to make sure that this or these people, whatever the case may be, fulfills its created purpose, whether it's nature, whether it's the blessings that God's given us, whether it's food, whether it's animals, and ultimately if it is people. I want to make sure that in my corner of the world, the opportunity I've been given to rule looks like you would rule if you were here. And for me, and I can only speak for myself here, but I've been given a few places to rule. I've been given a home. Now, depending on where you've come from, you might think, you rule your home, really. We're going to do... That means that I am ultimately going to be held responsible for making sure that my wife and kids become everything that God created them to be. And they experience and enjoy everything that God has given them to experience and enjoy. That's what it is to rule. It's not me making sure they know who's in charge. It's me making sure that my wife understands when she reads the verse, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, that she goes, I know what that's like. That is my responsibility. It means when my kids are reading through their own copies of God's Word, it says, fathers, make sure that you don't frustrate your children to the point of breaking up that relationship. They go, thank God for my dad. That is what it is for me to rule in those places. I've been given gifts and abilities. It's debatable how many I have, but I have some, and I have to rule that as well. It's about me making sure that I am maximizing every gift and every talent and ability that God might have given me. Not just saying, well, I'm gifted in this way, therefore I'll just express it however. It's me working that gift, ultimately just to see how far it can go, because God would not have given that to me as a toy. Your gifts and talents and abilities are not toys. They are gifts to be able to stretch you, to increase your influence, to put you in places that ultimately are going to allow you to be everything God created for you to be. I've been given the opportunity to rule in a way here. And again, I hope that you don't cut out a soundbite. That would be terrible for us as a church. But I have the opportunity and the responsibility of caring for each of you and making sure that you get to experience everything that God has for you. Pushing you, stretching you, challenging you to dream, equipping you to be able to live out your calling. That is all on me, and I know that. It's not something I can do by myself, but ultimately God is going to hold me responsible for that. Now, I don't know what true lengths of ruling that you've been given. Some of you have a home. Some of you live alone. Some of you have kids. Some of you will never have kids. That doesn't mean you're not ruling somewhere. You have people in your life. You have gifts. You have abilities. You have opportunities. It means ultimately that you and I are helping all of God's creation to become everything that it was created to become. Now, ruling is difficult. And it was made much more difficult after Adam and Eve failed. They were given the same responsibility, but it was not nearly as hard. And if you go back eventually to Genesis chapter 3, you'll see that Adam and Eve messed up. They didn't rule well. God spoke to them. He cursed the serpent that ultimately had tempted them. But then he turned to Adam and Eve. And he said, Adam, it's going to be hard for you to work this ground. It's going to fight back against you. You're going to have to work and earn this thing moving forward. He said, Eve, childbearing is not going to be enjoyable for you. And your husband is now going to be charged with the responsibility of leading your relationship. And you're not going to like that. And every married person said, amen. So it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be fun. There's going to be a lot of challenges there will be a lot of challenges along the way in this. So ruling is not a very simple thing. But God has given us over and over again instructions in His Word on how to handle some of those more difficult moments. But one that I go to, just for me personally, that helps is Colossians chapter 3, verse 23. He says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. So wherever you're ruling, whatever you're doing, do it as if you have been employed by God to carry out His rule. And if I view my responsibilities in that way, it will change the way I rule at home, rule in my relationships, rule in my church family, because I am ultimately employed by Him to rule for Him. Not for myself, not for my own gain, not for my own glory. But I'm not going to be able to rule well if I'm not reflecting. No one in my home wants to follow my rule if I'm not reflecting the image of God. If I am not treating my wife as Jesus treated the church, if I am not encouraging and parenting my kids as God has parented me, then they're going to fight against that rule, and they should. And it's going to be a very challenging experience to try to lead my home. But if I'm reflecting, it will help my rule. And we can't reflect, though, unless we're relating. So it all comes together. If ultimately we are not intentionally pursuing a relationship with God, even though it will cost us along the way, then we're not going to be able to rule well. We're not going to be able to relate well either. My relationship with my wife is obviously doing well. We've been together a long time now. But even though that was our anniversary date, and even though it began then, and even though, according to her, it began next month, along the way, there was a lot of flirting that went on. But looking back, I spent about 6 months flirting with her before nailing it down that I wanted to be with you. And I look back and realize my flirting game was just really bad, apparently. It just really off. Because all the little signals I was giving, me walking by the library, popping in, going, oh, hey, what are you doing? Studying. And I held no books going, yeah, me too. It was obvious that something was really amiss with my plans. But I did everything I could to try to help her understand that I was serious about this. And looking back on that relationship and thinking through this today, I just want to encourage you, those of you who are just flirting with God, you've flirted with Him for years, you've come so close, you've kind of walked in, strolled in, hey, God, I didn't think I'd find you here. And while you're here, if you would do this for me, and if you would help me out in this way, and in the end, we're not just a flirt, we're being a tease, and God's not going to be played. I think the actual scripture says God will not be mocked. We'll reap what we sow. And I want to challenge you and encourage you to stop the flirting and make a decision, nail it down. Either I am going to pursue knowing God as He knows me for the rest of my life, or I'm just done with this. Because this back and forth is never going to get you to the point where you ultimately were created to be. So no more flirting. Make a decision. Nail it down. Decide who you are and who you're going to be.